Welcome back. This is Kivumbi 2017 here on KTN News. We are speaking about the major issues in the run-up to the October 17th presidential election rerun, as was announced yesterday by the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission. But that issue of the election date is a big talking point right now. The National Super Alliance saying that they are opposed to that date. They were not consulted. Let me now join let me bring in Brian Mbogwa, Jubilee strategist, and Peter Amonga, political analyst. Thank you for joining me, gentlemen, tonight on our show. We shall be talking to Hesbon Owila, also from our City Center studio. He's a political analyst. He shall be joining us on this particular conversation from our City Center studio. Brian, NASA saying they were not consulted. What's your take on this?
I think they don't understand the term independent in the IEBC initials. You know, the court ruled that the IEBC should conduct fresh election within 60 days. And it's up to IEBC to decide how they'll conduct that election. As far as we are concerned, the ruling is not out in the public domain.
Right.
We were only given, even in fact, for the 4 judges, they didn't even give us their summaries. They just show the issue and their orders. So nobody knows what transpires in between. But IEBC has to start planning. By the time the judges releases their ruling, they can adjust from the findings of the ruling.
What do you believe consulted?
We were not consulted, and we were not supposed to be consulted. IEBC must do its work independently.
All right.
Yeah.
Mr. Amonga, what's your take on this? Are NASA justified to be jittery about the IEBC and everything they are doing?
Brian is right, but NASA are justified in this way, that not really justified, but they have cause to be worried. Maybe because just after the bruising battle they've had with Jubilee, and also after the hours in court, the few days they had in court, I think they just need to just kind of start off, plan afresh, and start their campaign. I tend to think this thing is about numbers, it's about investments, about finances,
right.
And most likely NASA are feeling like, look, we are not ready. We are not so prepared about this. And I think that's what's making jittery. But as Brian puts it, IEBC is an independent body. It doesn't need to consult Jubilee or NASA. They were ordered to prepare an election within 60 days.
Right.
So October 17th is actually within the 60 days that they were given.
All right. Let's bring in Hesbon Owila from our City Center studio. Hesbon, good evening, and thank you for joining us on this discussion. From where you sit, why is NASA opposed to October 17th as the date set by the IEBC for the presidential election rerun?
First, Ben, let me say that I think the issue of IEBC being independent is neither here nor there here. Because if you look at the whole situation broadly, and the fact that IEBC was given 60 days to conduct a fresh election, you'd possibly talk of an independent institution coming up with a date on its own. But I don't think that is the case here. There were a few issues that were raised, and I think the judgment was very clear that there were irregularities and illegalities. And therefore, if NASA seems to see a situation where this date is coming too early before these irregularities and illegalities are addressed, then I think they are within their own right, to contest this date and probably ask for, a latitude that would allow for all the other issues that were raised to be addressed, But again, you'd understand why everyone is jittery about, the complaints that are raised by NASA. And there is a sense in which you may also want to imagine that there are forces that are trying to frame NASA so that they come out as a party that is just jittery and complaining about everything. Because in essence, the mere fact that we are given an external limit of 60 days, and there is no limit within these 60 days. So long as the fresh election is conducted within 60 days and the issues are supposed to be addressed, you'd expect, common sense to reign on all the parties involved to address a number of issues, so much so that when they come up with the date, it is a date that is agreeable to all of them. And to that extent, you'd even ask yourself, why would IEBC rush into telling us the date Yet, it is clear that NASA is a major stakeholder in this election. So I don't think it's so much about IEBC.
In a few moments, I'll let Brian respond to your issues. But before he does that, do you think the IEBC should be overhauled, as NASA is, suggesting?
No, well, I think overhaul is such a big word to use here. But to the extent that there were irregularities and illegalities, I think there are individuals who are not just supposed to be kicked out of IEBC, but they're supposed to be held criminally culpable.
All right.
So if these individuals are many, then probably you might want to talk about an overhaul. But I don't think it is a complete overhaul.
All right. Brian, what is your take on the issues that Hezbollah is raising?
I think unless NASA has a prior dealing with the judiciary, we don't know what points the judiciary used to nullify the election. So unless they have a prior ruling, we don't. And even IEBC do not have that ruling. So IEBC is setting the pace. They are the ones to conduct election in 60 days. And in this election, IEBC do not own polling stations. Most of the polling stations are schools. And schools, as you know, they're in session. And within that period of the expiry of 60 days, examination will already be taking place. So when IEBC is coming with the date, it does not need to consult anyone. In fact, it was doing all political players a favor to involve them. All they have to do is make sure there's public's participation in their dealings and consider all factors, including school children, examination,
right.
Everything at play. They put it on the table, then they decide the best date. But they don't have to consult the players on when the date should be set.
Mr. Munga, the law says that the presidential election rerun has to be held within 60 days. That was a ruling by the Supreme Court. October 17th is 42 days from today. Is that sufficient time from where you sit?
It is sufficient time. It's very sufficient time. I tend to think even if it was to be 5 days after the ruling, still it was very sufficient. As Brian puts it, and he puts it very clearly, the ruling or the judgment that was issued out is not yet in public domain. We don't have it. Nobody seems to have it. And so the first respondent, who was IEBC, was told to ensure there's an election. So if I am the CEO of IEBC, and I've been ordered by the court to ensure there's an election within 60 days, I think that's the first thing I should start working on. And as we've just been told by your political reporter, already IEBC is setting in place already machineries. They are already putting their staff in place. They put people for logistics. They are getting everybody ready so that by October 17th, things are running. I tend to think announcing the date is very important. You see, October 17th is, as you put it, is around 42 days from now. But in those 42 days, very many other things can be done. The things that Hezbollah is talking about can be sorted out, can be, but the date must be set. We can't wait to set the date after we've consulted and done all the things that maybe Hezbollah is talking about, or NASA for that matter, is talking about. We have to set the date. Why? And I need to correct this perspective. The major stakeholders in this election are not just the political players. Kenyans are the major stakeholders. And Kenyans, we are parents. Kenyans, in fact, majority of Kenyans are parents, majority of the voters.
Right.
And because they are parents, issues like school timetable, school exams are very key. They're very important. And so I tend to think the letter that C.S. Matiang'i wrote to the IEBC, he didn't write now just as government, he wrote as a Kenyan, the Kenyan concern, that we have exams coming. Now that exams are coming, what can you as IEBC do for us?
We'll get into that. Hezbollah, what's your take on what Bwana Munga is saying? I know you're not holding brief for NASA or anything, but 42 days is enough, he says, to iron out all those issues that the NASA side is raising, isn't it?
I actually agree with Munga. I mean, this election is not about the political class. It's about the common mwananchi. And I think to that extent, then Amunga is, without knowing, actually underscoring what I'm saying, that if this election is about the common mwananchi, then it is not about the political class and IEBC doing stuff. It is about mwananchi getting to understand that whatever IEBC or any other member of the political class is doing is actually in line with what will give us a free, fair, and credible election. So setting an election date, telling Kenyans that everything is okay, that they're going to hack it in 42 days, is not enough. It is good, but it is not good enough. We need to be put on board so that everything else is on board, and we understand that a few things that were raised, and I think the brief judgment that was given actually highlights a number of things. So if we get to understand that some of these things are either addressed or will be addressed in the course of these 42 days, and we are likely to have a free, fair, and credible election, then I think that is what everyone is looking for, you know? Yeah.
All right, let's switch our attention to another very related issue that has come up when the NASA brigade was addressing this issue earlier today. They did speak about that issue of the examination dates. That is when the KCP exams are said to be held around that date. This is what the NASA leadership had to say about that.
Exams can be pushed. There's no harm in pushing the exams by 2 weeks. The children are not going to die. So this excuse by Matiang'i that, oh, in order not to delay the exams and so on, why the children are just going home for holidays. So there's no reason why you cannot delay the exams by 2 weeks to conduct such an important national exercise at the election of the President of the Republic of Kenya.
And besides, you don't need Jubilee's Pythagoras theorem to decipher that Matiang'i says in the morning that he wants elections on 17th, and in the afternoon, IEBC says the elections will be on 17th. I'm sure you can add it up and know who is standing behind the curtain and pressing the buttons.
With regards to
NASA principals Raila Odinga and Moses Wetangula there. Amunga, Raila says the exams, if they are pushed by 2 weeks, the children are not going to die.
Very unfortunate statement in political circles. As a political strategist, that's the worst word I can use. To use the word child and die in the same sentence, especially when we've had a fire at Moi Girls, Nairobi, where parents are still mourning and identifying bodies of their loved ones. That was unfortunate. But anyway, in the heat of the moment and given that they were just about to go and address a political rally, they could use those words just maybe for the sake of it. But again, let's say something about it. I am glad that the Education Parliamentary Committee led by Sabina Chege came out very strongly this afternoon and said, no, we cannot talk about exams. And what Honorable Wetangula is saying there, that we don't need Pythagoras something theory to know who's pulling curtains behind where, that's immaterial. Because according to me, the person actually pulling those strings are parents. Parents in this country, and as Hezbollah has agreed with me, are major stakeholders in this election. Even the same children are the future Justice Maragas and the future Ben Kitilis here. So we need to give them their space. We cannot talk about them carelessly with words like die. I think it's a political statement that can easily lead to suicide in terms of making statements.
Brian, what is your take on that statement and also the accusation by Wetangula that this is just Jubilee through Matiang'i pulling the strings? I
think Wetangula is playing politics. What you know, the moment court ordered a fresh election, IEBC issued a statement. And they said they will announce a date in consultation with the security forces and the Ministry of Education, because they have to put in mind that even if it was Raila Odinga as the minister, he will have been consulted by IEBC because they'll be using their premises. So they had to consult the ministry. And I think that consultation had been going on before even Matiang'i came to that press conference.
Right.
And I want to tell also this politician that as much as voters are people above the age of 18, we are Kenyans. Even those kids who are doing exams, they are Kenyans. We should also be mindful of them. They've been in school, they've been studying. The whole of this year has been politicking. So it will disrupt.
Just to add on what Brian is saying, even as we prepare towards these 42 days we're talking about, the same children in those schools, especially like oral exams like French oral, agriculture, and there are some exams that actually are done even before the main exam. So already we are interfering with them. And it's like we are not giving them their time to study, to revise. And so these are some of the things that we need to consider.
Hesbon, what's your take very quickly, because of time, on NASA? A lot of people seem to think NASA are putting the issue of examinations to the back burner, like they're not very important. What is your take on that?
Well, I think it's a very tricky and delicate issue, talking about the election and the fact that the elections in Kenya are very emotive, and the exam, there is likely to be a spillover. So you'd understand what NASA is actually saying, that you're better off having this election in a date that cushions the exam, and therefore that calls for pushing the exams. But I would still say that even if IEBC sticks with the 17th of October date, then it is important that they put everything in place, so much so that the 1 week later, which will be the exam week, is not interfered with. So ultimately, again, it is not so much about the date from where I sit, as it is about the preparation towards this date and putting everything in place and convincing the general public that everything is put in place to ensure a free, fair, and credible election.
All right, final question very quickly. Let me start with you, Brian. How much change or, tinkering up with the IEBC can be done? What is realistic in terms of what NASA are raising, saying this is IEBC that conducting a bad election and we need some kind of change? How much overhaul can be done in the remaining 42 days?
If it was that bad, the court could not have ordered the first respondent to conduct fresh election, number one. Number two, I still maintain my stand. So long as we don't have the detailed judgment, there's no way we can point fingers 1, 2, 3, 3. Because as far as I'm concerned, the election was free and fair. As the president say, we accept the verdict of the court, but not necessarily that we like what
NASA people would tell you the reason why CJ Maraga called for a rerun and invalidated the election of President Uhuru Kenyatta is because the election was not free and fair.
Then they should pressure us, the CJ, to release the judgment by tomorrow. We see those areas, because not everything went bad in the election. There are some areas. And we are not privy to what NASA, because there were thousands of documents. So no one knows what they went through and what they come up with. So the same IEBC is as independent as the judiciary. So if you cannot pressure the judiciary, also don't put pressure on IEBC.
Okay. Yes. Amunga, very quickly, 30 seconds.
I can say this. Whoever is given a responsibility in this country to do it very well. Those clerks who did not sign some of those forms, those people or presiding officers who didn't do their work, gentlemen and ladies, you've cost this country a big amount of money. That mistake is so costly. Whatever we are going back to is because somebody somewhere slept on his job. And we're not just talking about Chilobas and Chebukatis. We're talking about up to the small person in the link. And so, ladies and gentlemen and Kenyans, let us always be very careful when we take any responsibility to do. Ben, can people do it very well? It can cost us our lives and everything.
All right. Hesbon, your final thoughts, 30 seconds only. How much change can be achieved in the remaining time at the IEBC? And is it needed?
Yeah, it is needed. Ben, I think to the extent that there were irregularities and there are people who contravene the law of this country, cost a number of people turmoil, emotional turmoil, cost the country financial, expenses unnecessarily. I think these people should be held culpable, irrespective of the time limits. The court was very clear that IEBC will hold the election again, but it did not say that all the individuals in IEBC to hold elections. Actually, the pronouncement that there were illegalities and irregularities is in itself clear to tell us that even if we take the shortest time possible to deal with these people, we need to do that so that going forward, individuals know that when they are given a position at the behest of the common mwananchi, they need to deliver diligently, efficiently, and within the rule of the law.
Thank you, Hesbon. Hesbon Owila, political analyst, joining us live from our City Center studios. And Peter Amunga, political analyst, thank you for joining me. Brian Bogwa, Jubilee strategist, thank you for joining us and giving us your perspectives on this developing story. So I leave it on Kivumbi 2017 tonight. Be sure to join us every night at 8 p.m. to 9 p.m. as we discuss some of these issues as Kenyans continue to wait for the IEBC to conduct that presidential election rerun. Remember, developing story tonight, the Independent Electoral and Boundaries Commission releasing that memo, that story that Kenyans have been reading on social media. Some changes at the IEBC. Details at the top of the hour on KTN Prime with Linda Ogutu. That's where we leave it. Thank you for watching. I'm Ben Kitili. Bye for now.